picture this, a blizzard. It's raging outside, quiet suburban street, and like in the cold, harsh light of dawn, a body is found just lying in the snow.
Not just anybody, though.
Right? Not just anyone.
A Boston police officer.
Exactly. And the person, like, at the center of it all.
His girlfriend.
You got it. And you've sent us, like, a whole stack of info on this case. And honestly, it's one of those stories that just grabs you right from the start.
Oh, absolutely. It's a case with so many layers, so many, like, conflicting accounts. It really makes you think about how quickly a seemingly normal night can turn into a tragedy.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to do in this deep dive. Unpack everything we know about the death of John O'Keefe and the case against Karen Read. We've got witness statements, forensic reports, legal arguments, like the whole 9 yards. It's complicated for sure, but we'll break it down piece by piece so you can really get the full picture.
Yeah, it's important to understand the context, too. I mean, this isn't just a whodunit. It's a case that's divided a community. It's sparked intense media scrutiny, and it's even raised questions about potential conflicts of interest within law enforcement.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's set the scene. Karen Read and John O'Keefe, they were a couple, right? Had been dating for a while. Seemed to be pretty serious.
Yeah, they had a history, actually. They dated back in their 20s, then reconnected years later, sometime around 2019. I think Karen was spending a lot of time at John's place, almost like they were living together.
Gotcha. So rewind to January 28th, 2022, a Friday night. Nothing out of the ordinary. John and Karen head out to a couple of local bars, meet up with some friends.
Yeah, pretty typical night out, especially for, a couple in their 40s. Some of the people they were with were also Boston police officers. John himself was a 16-year veteran of the force.
Wow. And this is where things start to get a little bit complicated.
Yeah.
The group ends up at this bar called the Waterfall Bar and Grill. Around closing time, a friend of theirs, Jennifer McCabe, invites them to an after-party at her sister's house.
And that house, 34 Fairview Road, that's a key location in this whole story. It belonged to another Boston police officer, Brian Albert, and it's where John O'Keefe was last seen alive.
Okay, remember that monster snowstorm that hit the Northeast on January 29th? I mean, it was a big one. People were snowed in for days.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, that storm plays a crucial role. Early that morning, just after 6 a.m., a 911 call comes in. A man is found unresponsive in the snow outside 34 Fairview Road.
And that man was John O'Keefe. When the police arrive, they find Karen Read, Jennifer McCabe, and another woman, Carrie Roberts, performing CPR on him.
He was cold, not breathing, unresponsive. They rushed him to the hospital, but unfortunately he was pronounced dead a few hours later.
It's a tragic situation no matter how you look at it. And the circumstances surrounding John's death, that's what makes this case so difficult to unravel.
Right, and the police immediately launch an investigation. They start by talking to the people who were with John that night, the witnesses at the scene.
Makes sense. Jennifer McCabe tells them about the gathering at the Waterfall Bar and Grill, how she invited John and Karen over to her sister's place.
But when they interview Karen, her account of what happened that night starts to change.
Oh, really? How so?
Initially, she tells them she dropped John off at the house on Fairview Road, but didn't see him go inside. Said she wasn't feeling well and went home. Even described making a three-point turn in her car.
Interesting, but...
However, when the police tell her that Jennifer McCabe actually saw Karen's black Lexus SUV park outside the house for a while, her story shifts.
Okay, so what does she say then?
Now, she says they might have argued, and she's not even sure if she saw him after they left the Waterfall Bar. This changing story obviously raises red flags for the investigators.
Yeah, I can see why. And as they continue to process the scene, they find a couple of things that just add to the mystery.
Like what?
Well, right near where John's body was found, they discover a broken cocktail glass and some liquid, which they initially think is blood. They also find 2 small pieces of plastic, one clear and one red. Turns out these were broken off pieces of Karen's damaged taillight. She had mentioned to Jennifer earlier that she had a broken taillight.
So now the pieces are starting to come together. You've got Karen's car at the scene, a damaged taillight, fragments of it near the body, and a driver who admits to having been drinking that night.
Right. It's starting to look suspicious.
And things get even more complicated when the results of John O'Keefe's autopsy come back. The findings paint a very disturbing picture of his injuries.
Yeah. The autopsy report showed John O'Keefe had suffered severe blunt force trauma to his head and body. Multiple skull fractures, abrasions on his arm, black eyes, cuts on his face. It was brutal.
Oh my gosh.
The medical examiner also noted that John's pancreas was a dark red color, suggesting hypothermia was a contributing factor to his death. Basically, he was injured and then left out in the freezing cold.
Horrific. So naturally, the police start looking at Karen's car more closely. They get a warrant, tow her Lexus SUV from her parents' house and start analyzing it for evidence. Right. They find broken glass fragments embedded in the rear bumper, the shattered right tail light scratches, dents. I mean, the car had definitely been through something.
And remember those shards of glass found near John's body?
Oh, yeah.
The police find similar shards in the bumper of Karen's Lexus.
So that becomes a key piece of evidence for the prosecution. They start building a case that Karen, in a drunken rage, hit John with her car and then left him to die in the snow.
Wow. They also point to the fact that Karen herself admitted to being hammered that night and not remembering everything that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But the defense, of course, has a very different interpretation of all of this.
Right. Karen's defense team insists she's innocent. They claim John was actually assaulted inside the house at 34 Fairview Road, and then his body was moved outside later.
Hold on. So they're suggesting a cover-up. And not just by anyone, but by other police officers.
That's exactly what they're alleging. They claim that certain officers, particularly Trooper Michael Proctor, who was leading the investigation, have close ties to the Alberts. Remember, Brian Albert owned the house. And that this relationship may have led to a biased investigation, even a conspiracy to protect those involved and frame Karen.
Wow. Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. What evidence do they have to support these claims?
Well, they point to a few things. First, they argue that the abrasions on John's right forearm are more consistent with a dog attack than being hit by a car. They even brought in a medical expert to back up this claim.
And Brian Albert did have a German Shepherd.
He did, and that dog mysteriously vanished shortly after John's death.
Vanished, as in gone without a trace.
Well, Albert said the dog was rehomed, but the defense saw this as a potential attempt to get rid of evidence. They also highlighted the fact that the Alberts removed the flooring in their basement and then sold the house a few months later.
So the defense is painting a picture of a frantic cover-up. Multiple people working together to erase any evidence of what might have happened inside that house. But even if that were true, why? What was the motive for all of this?
Yeah, that's the big question. The defense hasn't explicitly answered that yet, but they seem to suggesting that something was going on inside that house that night. Maybe an altercation, maybe something illegal that the people there wanted to keep secret.
So they're saying John's death was either an accident or a result of a fight that went wrong, and these officers felt the need to protect their own.
It's a complex web of allegations, and we're just trying to follow the threads here. But there's more. The defense also brought up those surveillance videos from John's house.
Right, the ones that supposedly show Karen backing up her Lexus.
Exactly. The defense claims that in the video you can actually see her car making contact with John's parked SUV, which they say is how her taillight was damaged, not from hitting John.
So they're saying the broken taillight was from a minor bump into a parked car, not from a major impact with the person.
That's their argument. But the prosecution pushed back on that, saying the impact of hitting a person would be much more forceful, and that would be visible in the video.
It seems like both sides are taking the same pieces of evidence and interpreting them in completely different ways. It's a real he said, she said situation.
It is, and it's not over yet. Remember those text messages and voicemails that the police pulled from John's phone?
Yeah, the ones Karen left for John that night. What did those reveal?
Well, they definitely showed some tension between the couple. In one voicemail, Karen was yelling at John, saying she hated him and accusing him of cheating during a trip to Aruba.
So possible motive. But couples fight, right? That doesn't necessarily mean it escalated to violence.
Exactly. The prosecution would have to prove those angry words turned into something much more serious. But they did bring in another piece of the puzzle, John's niece and nephew who were living with him at the time. They testified that John and Karen argued frequently and that John had even talked about ending their relationship.
Okay, so a pattern of conflict emerges. But even with that, it all comes back to this. Did Karen actually hit John with her car?
And that's where things get even murkier. The defense dropped a bombshell. They claimed that someone inside the Alberts house made a Google search for how long to die in the cold at 2:27 a.m., just hours before John's body was found.
Whoa, that's creepy. Who made the search?
The defense alleged it was Jennifer McCabe. They pointed to data from her phone that suggested she was awake and using her phone in those early morning hours.
But didn't Jennifer tell the police she went home after the bar and last saw Karen and John there?
She did. The defense is now saying she's lying and that this Google search proves she was involved in something more sinister.
Okay, this whole thing is sounding more and more like a conspiracy theory. But then there was that other twist. Remember how the prosecution insisted there was no connection between Trooper Proctor, the lead investigator, and the Alberts?
Yeah, they issued a whole statement defending Proctor's integrity. Turns out it wasn't entirely true.
Because he was actually under investigation himself, right?
Exactly. A federal investigation for a potential violation of department policy, specifically regarding his relationship with the Alberts. It came out that they were much closer than initially revealed, had socialized together, even discussed having the Alberts babysit Proctor's child.
Talk about a conflict of interest. That throws a huge shadow over the entire investigation. Did he handle evidence properly? Were witnesses pressured? We can't know for sure.
And the defense jumped on this, arguing that Proctor may have lied to the grand jury about his connection to the Alberts, potentially influencing the evidence presented.
So we have this whole tangled web of relationships and potential motives swirling around the case, and it doesn't stop there. The prosecution's conduct has also been questioned.
Right. The Norfolk County District Attorney Michael Morrissey has fiercely defended the investigation and denied any wrongdoing. But remember those letters that were unsealed? They showed his office had been communicating with the U.S. Attorney's Office about a potential federal investigation into this case months before publicly acknowledging it.
So they knew about the federal probe but kept it quiet.
The defense argues it was a deliberate attempt to cover up any potential misconduct, both by the DA's office and the state police. It certainly adds another layer of suspicion. And then you bring in the blogger, Aiden Turtleboy Carney, and it gets even wilder.
Oh, yeah. What was his role in all of this?
He was a vocal supporter of Karen, publishing articles and social media posts attacking the prosecution and promoting the defense's narrative.
Which landed him in legal trouble, right?
Mm.
Witness intimidation charges.
Yep. The police believed Karen was leaking confidential information to Carney, which he then used to fuel his online attacks.
It's like a real-life legal drama playing out in the media.
Exactly. It's hard not to get caught up in the narratives, the accusations, the conflicting information. But at the heart of it, there's a man who lost his life, a family seeking answers, and a lot of unanswered questions about what really happened that night.
As of right now, the trial is scheduled for April 16th, 2024. We'll have to wait and see what new evidence is presented and what the jury ultimately decides.
Yeah, it's a case that's really captured the public's attention. You see crowds rallying outside the courthouse, some supporting Karen, some demanding justice for John. It's become very emotionally charged.
We've tried to unpack as much as we could in this deep dive. We've laid out the conflicting accounts, the disputed evidence, the allegations of misconduct. Now it's up to you to decide what you believe.
Do you trust the prosecution's case? Are you convinced by the defense's claims of a cover-up? Or are you somewhere in between? There are no easy answers here.
This case highlights the complexities of our legal system, the power of narratives, and the importance of critical thinking when faced with conflicting information.
Absolutely. We encourage you to stay informed, to keep asking questions, and to never stop seeking the truth, no matter how difficult it may be to find.
Well, this deep dive may be over for now, but the story isn't. We'll be following the case closely, and we'll keep you updated as things develop. In the meantime, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the Karen Read case?
Share your insights with us, and let's continue this conversation. And if you found this deep dive insightful, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes where we break down complex and fascinating stories just like this one.